A Karen and her child tried to steal my 10-week-old baby. A few days ago, on a sunny and beautiful day, I, 26 male, decided to take my baby out to the park. Don't ask about the mother. We walked for a while. Well, I walked. She was just sleeping in her carriage. I met up with my best friend, Masky, 28 male. That's a nickname because we look like two characters from a film called Marble Hornets. After a while, Masky suggested that since my daughter was sleeping, we should go grab some coffee and catch up. We went to the nearest coffee shop, got our drinks, and sat down to talk. After a few minutes, a woman arrived with her 3 or 4-year-old daughter. The woman said, "Aw, such a cute baby." I smiled and continued talking with Masky. Then, something caught both of our attention. The little girl was trying to pick up my baby, who was still sleeping. She accidentally dropped her back into the carriage, causing my baby to start crying. I immediately picked her up and began comforting her. The woman had stepped away, but the girl was still there yelling, "I want to hold her." I said, "Sorry, honey, but she's heavy, and I don't let anyone else hold her except my friend here." By then, Masky was looking around for the woman. I offered my baby some milk to calm her down, which worked. Then the woman returned and, thinking we couldn't hear her, asked her daughter, "Did you get the baby, honey?" Masky and I were shocked. We didn't know how to respond at first. Then Masky asked, "You're joking, right?" He knew how much my baby meant to me, and that I wouldn't let anything happen to her, especially when she was only a few weeks old. The woman then realized I was holding my baby, and she actually tried to snatch her from my arms. But Masky stepped in, and in a harsh voice said, "If you touch that baby, you're going to regret it." Now, Masky and I are pretty big guys. The woman got scared and started yelling for help, claiming that Masky had hit her, which, for the record, he hadn't. He doesn't hit anyone weaker than him, just scares them. We just stood there, unsure of how to react, when one of the coffee shop employees came over and said he'd seen the whole thing. He'd already called the police because the woman had tried to steal my baby. The woman looked shocked and didn't know what to do. Both Masky and I felt relieved when we heard that. But then, the woman started yelling, "No, that's my baby. They stole her from me." It made no sense. The employee calmly said, "Ma'am, the cameras caught everything." Moments later, the cops arrived and arrested the woman. The whole time, her daughter was crying and screaming, saying she wanted my baby to be her sister, and that she was a good girl and deserved a sister. The police took them away, and I put my baby back in her carriage. I pressed charges, and now we have to go to court in the next 5 weeks for attempted kidnapping. Update. Hi everyone. I almost forgot about everything until Masky reminded me. Yes, we did go to court, and luckily, we won. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in jail for attempted kidnapping, and her child was placed in foster care. However, something happened a few days after the court ruling. Karen's husband came to my apartment, yelling and threatening me. He wanted to fight me and was making explicit threats, 18+ things. Twice, he even took out a gun and shot at my door. Thankfully, me, my baby, and Masky are all okay. The man kept screaming about how I had ruined his life and family, and that he was going to kill me. We immediately called the cops, and within a few minutes, they arrived and arrested him. He was held for 48 hours but would be released after that. Masky suggested that we move out before the situation escalates further, and I agreed. Next week, we're moving closer to our workplace, and hopefully, we won't have to worry about anything like this happening again. Major props to Masky for being the ultimate baby bodyguard. The story itself is already wild, but I can't believe that they would show up and shoot at OP's door. If it was me, it'd be time to move and get a restraining order. Next story. Our entitled adult roommate is trying to govern the house. I moved in July to a 5-person apartment in a small Spanish city, known for its university life. I'm a student, as are the other 2 girls who arrived in August, while the other guy is working. We're all in our 20s. The issue is the 5th roommate, an adult American woman, over 40 years old, who moved in late August. We don't know her exact age or job, just that she's from California, but she's been nothing but a nuisance. When I found out we would be living with an adult woman, I worried, correctly, that instead of trying to cohabitate, she would try to act like the head of the household and impose her own rules. And that's exactly what she does. When she wants something done, it has to be when she says so. She doesn't agree with our chore division and hates our leniency with those tasks. She's also been constantly complaining about storage arrangements, even though there's plenty of space, except for the fridges, which have been a headache to organize. She only speaks English and barely makes any effort to communicate in Spanish. I'm fluent in English, but my other roommates aren't, so communication with her is often challenging. What we all agree on is that she has somehow fixated on me. It started with fat-phobic remarks, then she became aggressive and tried to control my own storage space. Since I have a lot of ingredients, I offered to free up space if the others needed it, but they declined as they had already chosen their storage areas. She told me I couldn't use more than 1 cabinet, but the thing is, she uses 2 different cabinets and also uses 2 bathrooms. Plus, she doesn't follow her assigned chores. It's a common pattern for her. Rules for thee, but not for me. Her aggression toward me became constant, but I tried to stay calm while losing my patience. Otherwise, my other roommates are sweet, responsible, and respectful. We always talk and agree on things, and any problem that arises gets resolved with a quick conversation. Things came to a head when I was using the kitchen, calmly cooking while listening to music on my headphones. I love to cook, and I always clean up after myself. She barged into the kitchen, accusing me of taking up too much space, even though 3 people can cook in that kitchen at the same time, and demanding that I stop spending so much time there. She also called me a hog. At that point, I lost my patience, raised my voice, and told her off. I called her obnoxious, disrespectful, demanding, and unreasonable, and I told her that she'd been nothing but a problem since she moved in. I forbade her from speaking to me until further notice. My other roommates overheard the argument, and they sided with me, which further annoyed her. She tried to establish new rules, like banning kitchen use after 6 p.m., requiring us to inform her of any visitors, and mandating a common lunch every week. The resounding no from all of us clearly bothered her, and she shut herself in her room. Since then, she's been avoiding us, and we're doing the same. She barely comes out of her room and doesn't speak a word. Sometimes she says silly things in the group chat, but she's ignored or cut off. The agency that manages the flat is aware of the trouble, and we've agreed that if this period of silence doesn't resolve things, she will be asked to leave. She's probably realized that she can't force her will on us and that we don't want to deal with her. For now, she's not acknowledged me at all, so at least she's respecting my wishes. I don't feel bad because my other roommates and I are a united front. We know how to deal with her, and I just hope she reflects and makes the right choice. Stay and behave or leave. Other issues with her. She's awake at night, so we hear her in the kitchen making noise at 4 or 5 a.m., but she complains if we make noise during the morning or midday because she's sleeping. She usually sends passive-aggressive messages at those hours, demanding that chores be done ASAP, but we just reply that we'll do them on our own time. She's laughed at one of my roommate's accents, mocking the way she speaks. She tries to manipulate the other girls by giving them gifts, which are just old clothes she leaves at their doors. And when things don't go her way, she says, "I've been so good to you. I give you gifts. This is roommate drama at its peak. The audacity of this woman trying to control a house full of adults like she's the queen or something. But the fat-phobic comments? Completely unacceptable. I'm glad OP and their roommates united against her nonsense. Honestly, when someone's throwing passive-aggressive texts and gifts to manipulate, it's time for them to go. Next story. My mom thinks a court will give her my house. I bought a small starter home during the housing market crash, completely by myself. I lived there for nearly a decade before buying a larger home with my now husband. My parents really wanted to live in my old house because it was small and easy to maintain. They've had a foreclosure in the past, so there's no way they'd be able to get another mortgage. Also, my dad is retired, and my mom doesn't work. They asked to rent the house from me. For a discounted rent, they paid off the remaining mortgage, let's say $50,000, using part of a 6-figure inheritance they received. A lease was written, stating that this was a prepayment of rent, and they would only be responsible for the taxes and insurance, paying $350 a month. The lease also specified that rent would only go up when taxes or insurance increased. We signed the lease, included all the usual terms, and had it notarized. That's how things have been for a while. So, to be clear, I'm not making a dime on this house. Recently, I told them the rent would go up by $3, yes, just $3, because of a slight increase in the insurance. My mother completely lost her temper. She called me greedy and said she was going to tear out everything she had done, like the garden and other cosmetic changes, and claimed I owed her. She also said I couldn't evict her because it was her house, and that she wasn't responsible for the insurance, even though the lease says otherwise. She argued that the insurance hadn't gone up in a decade, as if lumber prices haven't skyrocketed. She even insisted a court would give her my house. We have a notarized lease. They are listed as tenants, and I'm the only one on the deed. My father, who tends to avoid conflict, demanded to see the bills to make sure I wasn't ripping them off. For context, the house is within commuting distance to Manhattan, and a studio apartment around here goes for about $1,500 a month. This is a whole house with a large yard for their dog. I could easily charge $2,000 a month if I wanted to. I sent them copies of the taxes and insurance documents, showing only their address. I even give them a discount on the taxes by paying them early. I told my mother to consult a lawyer, hoping they'd set her straight. I guess my dad agreed with me because now she's threatening to divorce him. First, I want to thank everyone for the support. I was mainly venting because I was upset after our argument, and I've been dealing with some health issues, which my parents know about. So my emotions were all over the place. They've lived in the house for 4 years now. My mom has always been entitled and has had issues with alcohol. Weekends and summers were spent with family, and my aunt later admitted this was to keep us away from my mom's drinking. I mainly did this to help my dad after he had heart surgery and needed to retire from a physically demanding job he'd had for 36 years. My parents asked to pay off the mortgage as a prepayment of rent, so that their only big monthly expense would be health insurance. I had other people interested in renting the house, but I didn't ask my parents for this arrangement. They offered. They didn't co-sign the mortgage or help with the down payment, and their names aren't on the deed. There have been rent increases in the past due to rising taxes and insurance, and there was never an issue until now. My mom has a history of putting her problems on me, and apparently, $3 was my breaking point. When I graduated from high school, I started paying $200 a week to my parents, until I moved out at 20. I worked 65 hours a week on top of school to manage this. Unsurprisingly, my parents foreclosed on their home soon after I moved out. I've made other financial mistakes, like putting my mom on my phone plan, only for her to pay me for just 3 months out of the 2-year contract. She also promised to contribute money to my wedding, but never delivered. They didn't pay for college or clothes once I got a job at 16. I know these are all red flags, but I trusted my dad more than her and thought I was doing a good thing by letting them rent the house. I want to keep this house because I love it and plan to move back one day. It's just too small for us right now as a growing family. I'd also like to let my child live there when they go to college to avoid dorm costs and give them some freedom. My mom threatens divorce all the time, so I doubt she'll actually follow through with it. Second update. I finally have an update, but unfortunately, it's not what I expected. To backtrack, after my mom's divorce comment, they aren't getting divorced. In fact, they celebrated their anniversary at a casino. I didn't speak to them for a week. Last weekend, I tried to talk to my dad to get an apology, hoping he'd be more reasonable. He wasn't. He doubled down, claiming they didn't realize what was in the lease, that the house was uninhabitable when they moved in. It wasn't. And that they wouldn't have done work on the house if they knew they were just renters. They complained about things like the garage screen door and the shed roof. My husband and dad replaced it together. And even a leaky hose. None of this affects the livability of the house, but as my lawyer said, and they agreed to live there in its original condition. My dad kept talking about what they've done for me without acknowledging anything I've done for them. At that point, I said some not-so-nice things, including mentioning the alcohol-related memory problems everyone had brought up. They wanted to know if they could still take my son to the fair. Absolutely not. I told them I didn't want either of them around my family until they came to their senses and decided to pay the rent increase or leave. Final update. Today, my mom called and asked what needed to be done to resolve the situation, because not being able to see my son was upsetting them. I told them they needed to apologize for how they treated me. Well, it turns out they were scammed. Homeowners in my area get daily calls and letters from people wanting to buy their houses, which I've told my parents to ignore. But apparently, they had been getting calls from someone who claimed they were going to rent the house. This person pretended to represent me. Someone even showed up at the house, pushing to talk to my mom. This all happened before I mentioned the rent increase. So when I told my parents about the $3 increase, my mom thought it was connected to this scam and panicked, thinking I was raising the rent to force them out. They never asked me about it because they were scared and thought they had nowhere else to go. I explained to them that's not how it works, and that they should have just talked to me. They apologized for their behavior and were embarrassed that they fell for a scam. Thankfully, they hadn't given any money or personal information to the scammer. I explained everything about the lease and reassured them that as long as they keep paying taxes and insurance, I'm not throwing them out. So, that's the update. They're not getting evicted, but I might have to keep a closer eye on them to make sure they don't fall for any more scams. PSA: if your parents have Medicaid, be aware that large medical expenses can lead to them having to drain their bank accounts and sell assets before Medicaid will cover the costs. This means the government can take property or demand money from gifts given in the last 5 years. It's something to keep in mind if you're trying to protect your parents financially. Next story. Karen insults pastor's daughter and gets embarrassed. This story I'm about to tell happened several years ago, and I only just remembered it after seeing the same Karen at the grocery store. For some background, this takes place in a small-town church in the Midwest. I know y'all already have some red flags raised, but it wasn't all that bad. In fact, it was quite nice. Most of the people who attended were really nice elderly folks. There were only a handful of people under 30. I was easily the youngest person there, maybe 13 or 14 at the time. Anyway, I suppose I should introduce the main character of this story, the pastor's daughter. Let's call her Samantha. I think this was around the time she graduated high school. She was awesome. She actually acted as the church's Sunday school teacher, even though I was the only one attending. LOL. She always snuck me a second granola bar during snack time. A big thing to know about Samantha. She was a lesbian. I'm not kidding. She even had a girlfriend at the time whom she brought to church with her. Now, before anyone gets worried for her, she seemed fine. Nobody was up in arms about her sexuality. Aside from the occasional disapproving look from one of the regulars, nobody really said anything. I do remember one conversation Samantha had with the church bus driver, who said he was disappointed about her choice in partners. But that was it. Nobody said a mean thing about her. That is, until this Karen showed up. She was new in town and had come to our church around winter. You know that stereotype about the super evangelical woman? She fit it perfectly, super loud, a bit on the larger side, and dressed in a fancy Sunday outfit complete with a hat. She was easily the most fancily dressed person there. She also had 2 kids, a baby boy and a teenage daughter. I wasn't really paying much attention to her, though I could definitely hear her mumbling about something. Anyway, the story begins during service. Samantha had brought her girlfriend, and Karen and her family were sitting a couple of pews behind them. Just before the incident, I was passing around the donation dish. I distinctly remember Karen glaring daggers at the back of Samantha and her girlfriend's heads as she dropped some cash into the dish. Pastor John, that's what I'll call him, was giving his sermon when it happened. I heard Karen screech, which scared the life out of me. I think Samantha and her girlfriend might have snuggled a little too close. Anyway, the whole church fell silent as Karen proceeded to go on the biggest homophobic rant I've ever heard. I even learned a slur or 2 because of it. She demanded that Samantha and her girlfriend be thrown out of the church. The whole place was silent for a moment before Pastor John cleared his throat and spoke. I can't remember everything he said, but there's one part of his speech I remember so clearly, and it made me respect him immensely to this day. My daughter's sexual orientation does not change the love I have for her, nor does it diminish the worth that God has endowed her with. She is made in the image of God, as we all are, and her worth is inherent and unassailable. To suggest otherwise is to misunderstand the very essence of our faith, which is rooted in love, grace, and acceptance. Aspects, it seems, you don't uphold yourself. It was like he was handing down the word of God himself. By the end of it, everybody was glaring disapprovingly at Karen. Her daughter looked like she wanted to disappear, the baby was crying, and Karen was practically purple. She screamed something about the place being a false temple, and that we would all burn for defending this insert slur before storming out. I could literally hear her tires screeching as she sped out of the parking lot. After that, I think the rest of the churchgoers softened towards Samantha. I distinctly remember this one elderly couple asking Samantha and her girlfriend about LGBTQ topics a couple of weeks after the incident. Too long didn't read. Karen screeches at the pastor's daughter for being gay. The pastor delivers a powerful speech and basically banishes her from the church. Next story. Entitled neighbor demands. We extend our wall and threatens to report us to the city. This is so ridiculous. I've lived in this house with my grandparents for about 6 years. When we moved in, we had this awful wooden retaining wall facing the neighbor's property. Her property is downhill from ours, so the retaining wall keeps our yard from washing away into hers. We found out last year that the wall was rotting and needed to be replaced, so we recently had it replaced with beautiful retaining stones. We also extended the wall past where the previous wall had been. We couldn't take it all the way to the street because of the city's guidelines, but it goes far enough. It could be extended by maybe 3 feet, but we couldn't afford to go any farther. Well, the neighbor, who we had gotten along with until now, didn't like it. She complained to us that our wall wasn't long enough, and that her yard was going to wash away. She claimed she already had rivers running through her yard. We live on a street with no sidewalks, so everyone has ditches for drainage. She never cleans hers, despite having huge trees dropping sticks and leaves into it, so her yard floods when it rains. She's blaming us for that. She then said she could pay for the landscapers to extend the wall and showed my grandma some brown retaining stones she said she could get to finish the wall. Our wall is gray, so of course, Grandma said no. The neighbor said she couldn't deal with it and didn't want to be rude, but would report us to the city if she had to. My grandma said, "Go ahead," and walked away. What makes her think she has any right to mess with our wall? Our landscapers even removed a stump from her property for free. She asked them if they could, and she never even thanked them. As far as we know, she either hasn't reported us to the city, or the city told her to pound sand. She's tried to make conversation with me, but I won't talk to her. I have too much to worry about without having her try to manipulate me into talking to my grandma. Edit to add some clarification. Her yard has been damaged like that since before we moved in, she told us as much. So it wasn't caused by our new wall. The new wall was put in by professionals, so it has a proper drainage system installed. None of the damage she pointed out could have been caused by our new wall. We know this because it hadn't rained in the days between the wall being finished and her complaining, so there was no storm water for our wall to let into her yard. Also, the damage was on the other side of the yard, so it wasn't caused by the installation itself. She never told us about the water damage in her yard until she was demanding we extend our wall. If she had, we probably would have put a new one in sooner. The landscapers did get her permission to go onto her property to build the wall. The wall isn't on her property, but in order to put everything in properly, they had to use her yard. She was fine with it as long as they fixed her yard when they were done. Which they did. She confirmed that it looked great. We got all the proper permits and everything, so there's really nothing she can do at this point. How is OP's neighbor going to blame OP for her own flooding problems? How do you not clean your ditch and then expect the wall to magically fix everything? OP's grandma handled that really well. It's wild how some people try to make their issues somebody else's responsibility. Next story. Lady at the holiday resort. Seeing you get the karma you deserved still satisfies me to this day. My family and I went to Crete on holiday, staying at a lovely all-inclusive hotel close to the beach. The food was decent, drinks were plentiful, and there were pools and sunbeds, everything you could want for fun. The hotel mainly hosted people from Denmark. Thinking back, I don't actually remember anyone else but Danish people. I am from Denmark myself. There was a woman and her husband who also spent the week at the hotel while we were there. The husband was very quiet and seemed to just be dragged around by her. We got quite used to her complaining at dinner and her fussy way of marching up to the young holiday guides at the hotel to nag them. But we did not mind her much at first. My family and I love experiencing local culture. While exploring the city, we found a wonderful local restaurant on top of a tall hill at the back of the city. It wasn't even really a restaurant. It was a Greek mama who cooked in her kitchen and let people eat on her terrace with a beautiful view of the sea. It was very humble, and the food was honest and amazing, delicious in every way. The mama was so caring and kind and kept coming to interact with us. It was fantastic. So we ate there a couple of times during the week. One night, coming back to the hotel, the Karen came marching up to us. "Karen, how dare you?" Us. "What?" "Karen, you have paid for your all-inclusive meals and then you don't even eat dinner here." Us. "We paid for it, so we can do what we want with it. If we want to eat somewhere else, we can do that." "Karen, don't you think that is a massive waste?" Us. "We're sure they are used to it." "Karen, Well, I think it is disrespectful, and you ought to know better. We just laughed and walked away from her. The next day, she and her husband had booked a hike through a gorge, Samaria Gorge, I think. You hike through this nature area, then end up in a rural city that is only accessible by walking there or taking a boat. Once you arrive in the city, you take a boat and then a bus to get back to the hotel. Well, the lady and her husband weren't exactly fit. The reason we know what happened is that they were missing at breakfast. When they arrived later, her thundercloud was so heavy that the whole hotel felt it. We then saw a very shaken hotel guide, a girl probably around 18 to 20 years old. Coming up to comfort her, she told the story. Karen and her husband had taken the hike. Halfway through, their bodies had given up, and they were too far in to return. So, they had to wait for a couple of donkeys from the rural city to come pick them up and carry them to the end destination. Once they arrived in the city, the last boat had already sailed, so they had to rent a hotel for the night at an exorbitant price. The next morning, they took the boat and then the bus back to the hotel. After this, while Karen remained like a thundercloud for the rest of the holiday, we didn't hear more from her. She and her husband stuck to each other in the corners and were more quiet. I feel sorry for them ruining their own holiday, but I'm glad it didn't affect us. They've given us a lot to laugh about since then. It must be hard to be that entitled. And poor husband, my heart goes out to him. Edit. Yes, I also have a lot of sympathy for the staff, tour guides, and the poor donkeys. Honestly, anyone who ever has to interact with this woman. Next story. I'm glad my sister got what she deserved. My sister is 25, but she still acts 13. She assumes things will go her way and won't take responsibility when it backfires. For example, when she asks Dad to go to a movie or eat out, she will still try to get him to pay for her meal or ticket, even if it was her idea. One time, I asked which car I could drive. My parents said I should drive our Toyota Vios. She got mad at me when I took the car because apparently the Vios had a sticker for an area that requires one. You can go to that area without a sticker, but you must take a longer route. And she was supposed to tell me that I should ask all siblings who was using the car. The thing is, she did not ask my parents if she could use it. She never told my parents about the party she would attend. She just assumed people would ask her. It backfired, but she still doesn't see it as her fault. Last year, my sister got a dog. In our house, we had 4 dogs, 3 toy poodles, 2 male, 1 neutered female, and a male Labrador. My dad did something for a friend, and the friend was super grateful, so he offered to give my family a dog. My sister wanted the dog, a female poodle. Now we have 5 dogs. The thing is, my sister thinks her dog can breed with another poodle and make money from the breeding program. The dog was only 8 months old when we got her. However, my sister is a poor owner and handler. She still goes out with her friends and assumes my brother and I can watch the dog. The dog almost broke my laptop by putting her paw on the screen and almost bringing it down. But my sister said, "You shouldn't have used it there." One time, my parents went out one weekend because my dad's cousin died. My sister left for a party and didn't even tell my brothers or me about babysitting her dog. She assumed I would sleep in my parents' room and watch the Labrador and her dog there. I just left. The poodle peed on my mom's carpet. My brother sent a photo to my mom. She got so mad at my sister and tried to talk it out when she returned from the funeral, but my sister just walked away from her. It really upset my mom. What I hate so much is that my sister goes out with friends and stays with them until 2 a.m., but she has a poodle. I told her that she can hang out with friends and her boyfriend, but can only do it for about a maximum of 3 hours. Sorry, you have a dog to take care of. She still does not listen. She doesn't bother to get her dog outside or into my mom's room when she returns. Last month, the dog went into heat, and it was a long weekend in my country. My sister decided to go out for 4 days with her friends. I didn't know it until the day itself. I only found out when she left. She just left and never told us how to handle her dog. When my mom went out for a month, she told the kids what to do if the dogs went into heat or got sick. My sister did none of that. It was really hard controlling her heated dog while the Labrador was going crazy. My sister wasn't there. My mom didn't understand why my sister made her trip with friends so long. It could have been just 1 day, but my sister went for 3 nights. That's when my mom decided to have the dog neutered. She told my sister about it, but my sister said no. However, my mom continued with the plan. The female poodle got neutered last Friday. My sister went berserk on my mom and lashed out. The argument lasted for 2 hours, and my sister cried in her room for another 2 hours. She wanted that breeding program to happen, but my mom neutered her dog due to her being a lazy owner. My sister thinks my mom doesn't want her to see her friends, but all my mom was trying to say was to minimize time with them because she has a dog to train. Anyway, I'm glad it happened to my sister. Next story. Age restrictions aren't my problem. I work in what is essentially a huge play place for children. There are no age restrictions except for one single room, which is limited to children under the age of 3. It also requires them to be supervised by a member of their group aged 16 or older, because we are just there to facilitate play and make sure everyone is being safe. We are not babysitters. Everyone, staff included, is required to have their shoes off. When in the room, we don't want dirt, mud, etc., being tracked into a space where lots of little ones are crawling around on the floor. We deal with people being mildly annoyed over these rules on a pretty regular basis, but typically, they don't make a big deal about it. Recently, a mom came up to the little entrance gate to the room with her 2 kids. One was younger than 3, and the other was very obviously at least 5 or 6 years old. Before I could even say hello, she was telling me, not even asking, that the 5 to 6-year-old would be coming into the room regardless of the rules, because she didn't have anyone else who could watch him, and her younger child really wanted to come in. I politely attempted to explain that I couldn't allow that. We take the age rule very seriously due to past issues, and we can get written up for allowing older kids into the room. She made a huge show of groaning and rolling her eyes at me, then told the older child that he could just go play somewhere else while she and the child under 3 came to play in the room, requiring me to tell her that she could not have her kids off on their own without her. She then proceeded to flip out at me. Every time we come here, I've been allowed to bring my older child in here with me. No one's ever told us that was a rule before. And so on. I explained to her that if that was true, my coworkers had made a mistake, and that I was fully expected to maintain the age limits in the room. She got angrier and angrier, and ended up goading her youngest into a full-on crying meltdown by telling him, "This person is saying, you don't get to have fun. If he's not letting us in, then we just have to go home because I can't deal with both of you." It all wrapped up with both of her kids crying as they were being shoved back into their stroller, and the mom storming off, swearing she was going straight to our admissions desk to report me, and then going home to write a review. I asked around later and found out that she did go to the front desk to complain and was apparently utterly livid when she was told, "Yeah, sounds like our employee did their job. That room is exclusively for kids 3 or younger, and we do require that kids stay with their adults." She still hasn't left a review, though. I was looking forward to seeing my name mentioned. The rules are there for a reason. Just because you get away with something previously does not mean it's right. I'm glad the admissions desk staff had OPs back. Next story. How my untitled late aunt lost everything. Buckle up because this story is an absolute doozy that spans nearly 4 years. Some backstory that's relevant to the story. In December of 2020, my father agreed to put his mother into a nursing home to protect his sister, my aunt, from an elder abuse investigation and prevent my grandmother from being moved into state care. Because of my aunt's negligence, my grandmother had been hospitalized 3 times in 2 months. Once for a severe UTI, another time for an infected wound because my aunt secured my grandmother's diaper with duct tape, and the final time because of second-degree burns after my aunt left a heating pad on my grandmother's back overnight. Ironically, in October 2021, my aunt would end up in a nursing home after she burned herself with a heating pad and didn't get medical treatment until the burn was badly infected. In January 2022, my grandmother passed away at the age of 94. In my grandparents' will, they split their estate between their 2 children 50-50. However, because neither my father nor my aunt was on the deed to my grandparents' house, it was signed over to a probate lawyer who would be tasked with selling the house. When my father started going through his mother's affairs in February 2022, he discovered that the state was on the verge of taking the house because the only bills my aunt bothered to pay were the electric and cable bills, and she hadn't paid property taxes since December 2020. My father also discovered that there were 2 massive liens on the house totaling almost $200,000. One was from the nursing home my grandmother had been in because my aunt hadn't paid them either. The other was because my aunt convinced my grandmother to take a home equity loan out on the house so she could buy a car. Initially, she was only supposed to take what she needed for the car, roughly $6,000. However, my aunt went behind my grandmother's back and ended up taking the full $100,000 the bank offered them. My aunt had been able to co-sign for the loan, so she was authorized to take the full amount. She also never made any of the monthly payments on the loan because she legitimately thought loans were money banks. Just give people for free. No strings attached. My aunt never told anyone what she did with the remaining $94,000. But the rest of the family suspects that she gambled it away at local casinos. My aunt was also given full access to my grandmother's bank account, which she had almost completely drained before my grandmother passed. This meant my father had to pay any outstanding bills out of his own pocket, though he was eventually reimbursed by the lawyer. At some point, between late January 2022 and March 2022, in an attempt to buy herself some time, to recover enough to leave the nursing home, and thinking that the house couldn't be sold if someone was living in it, my aunt convinced one of her friends to move into my grandmother's vacant house unbeknownst to my father and the lawyer. As you can imagine, things got messy when my father found out. Initially, my aunt told my father that the man was there to take care of her 2 cats. However, even after my aunt was court-ordered to sign her 2 cats over to my father due to neglect and abuse, the man refused to leave. Both cats have been treated and rehomed and are doing well. We eventually found out he had broken his lease, moved out of his apartment, and had nowhere else to go except his and my aunt's daughter's house, which adamantly refused to let her father move in with her. Around April, my parents started to deep clean the disgustingly dirty house with the man still living there, and he did everything in his power to obstruct my parents' efforts. He'd call up claiming he was sick with COVID, which my parents almost always called his bluff on since he was physically disabled and never left the house, nor did anyone but my parents visit. One day he told my mother, "Well, Sharon said we'd be able to live here forever, and that my father didn't have the guts to kick me out." Well, my mom told my father what had been said, and the very next day my father gave the man an ultimatum. My father told the man, "Either you leave on your own by May 1st, or I'll have you evicted." The man chose the eviction route because my aunt told him they can't legally evict a disabled person, and he believed her. He ended up having to move in with his daughter, who is no longer speaking to my aunt because my aunt has ruined that woman's livelihood on multiple occasions. But that's a whole other story. However, before he left the house, per my aunt's orders, he stole several valuable pieces of jewelry, including a box of rings that had been willed to her cousins. We were able to get the stolen jewelry back in late 2023 after the probate lawyer had to send police to retrieve it, which is another doozy of a story. Because of the whole squatter incident, we missed a massive housing boom where houses were selling for significantly more than what they were worth. The house was put on the market during a slump and sold for almost $150,000 less than what it was worth. This led to another lengthy legal battle with my aunt because she refused to sell or throw out any of her furniture in another attempt to buy enough time to leave the nursing home until she was court-ordered to do so. Given what the house sold for and deducting the lien from the home equity loan, the lien the nursing home put on the house had been dismissed by a judge. My father ended up with just under $60,000, while my aunt ended up with just under $50,000. My aunt got less because the probate lawyer charged her more than he charged my father because she was the one who had drawn things out for so long. Around that time, my aunt had been deemed unfit to make decisions for herself by a judge and several of her doctors, and she ended up signing her half of the inheritance over to my father to avoid losing it to the nursing home she was in. My aunt passed away on August 1st at the age of 68 from multi-organ failure caused by years of heavy smoking, ignoring her diabetes, and refusing to consent to a surgery that would have likely saved her life. We didn't have a funeral for her. We simply had her cremated, and her ashes, along with pictures and other personal belongings, were given to her older daughter. My aunt's younger daughter tried to sue my father for the rest of her mother's inheritance, but the suit was quickly dropped since the money my aunt had inherited after her mother's death had already been signed over to my father. So, my aunt's daughter had no right to it. Our one saving grace in this whole fiasco was that my aunt was in a nursing home for the entire process. Otherwise, it would have been significantly messier. There's a lot I didn't go into for the sake of not typing out an almost literal novel, but I'll gladly elaborate on anything I can. Next story. Apparently, the whole park belongs to her and her dogs. This happened to me earlier this morning. I just moved to a new city less than a month ago and have been checking out the parks where dogs are required to be on a leash. I have an older dog, a little terrier, and he's been attacked in the past by large dogs, so random dogs running up to him off-leash freak him out. It also makes me a bit nervous because I was also attacked as a kid by a dog. Bitten in the face, almost lost a cheek, and had to have reconstructive plastic surgery. But by and large, I love animals, especially dogs, because 9 times out of 10, a dog's bad behavior is because of the owner, so I don't blame the dog. So, at a new on-leash park this morning, things are going fine until my dog and I walk over a rise, and further down the trail, about 20 to 25 yards away, is a woman with 2 dogs, both off-leash. The little wiener dog is going nowhere fast, but the German Shepherd sees me and my dog and immediately bolts for us, barking. I picked up my terrier and lifted him over my head by the time the German Shepherd reached us. I've learned over the last 5 years of having him that this is the easiest way to keep him calm. Her dog is now right there, growling and trying to jump up to get at my dog. I loudly told the woman to call off her dog. She just stood there watching. Her dog made another jumping lunge for mine, so I used my legs to push it away and yelled, "Call off your dog," again. This apparently upset her because she completely lost it. This woman started screaming at me, calling me names and telling me to get out of my park and to stop kicking my dog. I'm not kicking her dog. I'm still just using my legs to deflect her dog each time it tries to jump up at my dog, which I still have held up over my head. I yelled again, "Call off your dog. If it bites, I will call the police." She called her dog off then, but it took a few attempts before it stopped. At no point did this woman even move from where she was. She just stood there until her dog finally responded to her command and went back to her. As soon as she had him by the collar, she started to yell at me again, telling me to get out of my park. I took off back to the parking area with my dog and got him in my car. Is it over? Oh no. This woman also came into the parking area and started loading her dogs into her car, while continuing to scream at me about how I've ruined her day, reiterating that it's her park and she can do whatever she wants there, with more swearing peppered through her tirade. I took the opportunity to snap a picture of her and her license plate, then Googled the local non-emergency line and called. This made her visibly angrier, and she looked like she was going to come across the parking area toward me until I started talking into the phone about how I'd like to make a report about an aggressive dog and a woman in the park. The woman proceeded to get into her car and leave in a hurry at that point, still cursing and swearing at me, which definitely helped confirm the validity of my call. Edit. Just adding that I decided to call the non-emergency line anyway, because while her dog didn't bite me, her utter lack of concern and behavior, coupled with her dog being aggressive, makes me worry this won't be an isolated issue. The park in question has a large play area for children near the parking lot, and I would hate for this woman's entitlement to result in a child or someone else and their dog being harmed by her lack of desire to follow the clearly posted rules to keep dogs leashed. I don't like to stereotype, but this woman was the epitome of an entitled person. I'd say she was in her late 50s or early 60s, white, with that specific haircut, and driving a new green Kia Sport. But this person either needs to get back on her medication or start some, because the absolute conviction she kept screaming about the park being hers was off the charts. Edit. A couple of things. 1. Wow, some of you are quick to jump to hurting an animal. If the aggressive dog had actually bitten me, or my dog, I would have used force at that point. But going automatically to violence against an animal is not my first instinct, likely because I grew up seeing a lot of animal abuse and experiencing physical abuse myself. Not a great family situation. 2. I did make a report to the non-emergency police line, so there's no need to keep saying I need to report this. Next story. Bride from the outer rings of hell. Quick backstory. Before all of this, I had a great relationship with my sister-in-law. All the events surrounding her wedding and her behavior toward us, my husband and me, seemed very odd. My husband and I ran a small entertainment company that we enjoyed. We specialized in DJing weddings. When his sister got engaged, the rest of the family and I found out over Facebook. Okay, whatever. Months went by, and then she called my husband and asked if he was available to DJ for an event. He asked for the date. We could make it work, but it was very short notice. It was such short notice that my husband might not even get off work, so the responsibility fell to my pregnant self to have a set list ready and handle all discussions with her. Quick backstory. When my husband and I were getting married, my sister-in-law jokingly said we stole her wedding date, even though she was not in a committed relationship or even close to one at the time. I thought it was a joke, but apparently it set this all in motion, because that's the only thing I can think of that may explain her behavior about her wedding date being a week after mine. My husband and I both told her that she could still use the date. We didn't care. It's just a day. We got together to talk about the music she wanted. She gave 0 suggestions, just that she was the only one picking and that her fiancé didn't care. Odd, but not my circus. I'm pregnant, uncomfortable, and trying to get her to tell me what kind of music she wants and the order of events, when we're needed, what other equipment they need, etc. 0 input, 0 help. She only said she didn't want 2 songs and that people could request music but no songs she didn't like, of which she only named 2. I told my husband as we were leaving that if we ever had a client like her, we would be canceling the contract. Speaking of which, she convinced him not to sign one. That's important. He agreed, but hadn't been able to tell her no at the time. Days to the wedding were quickly counting down. She made it clear she wanted a unique song to walk down the aisle to, but has yet to say what. I tried texting her since I'm the lead on the event. She decided to text my husband only this line. Concerning hobbits. That's it. Nothing else. My husband didn't notice it. I tried texting her again days later. She then said she told him. I checked his phone and asked her if that's the message. She confirmed. She also hadn't told me or her brother her wedding colors, or how she would like us dressed. I finally got that information from their eldest sibling, and just barely managed to get a maternity dress in time. It's important to note that formal invitations did go out. We just never got one. With the wedding a few days away, I got the ceremony and reception music ready. She had made it clear there was to be no music in between, which is important later. The wedding took place in the parents' backyard in the fall of 2020. The guest list had gone from large to minimal in a matter of days before, because of COVID. She really thought people would want to come no matter what. I was only going because my area was away from people. Thankfully, my husband got work off and went down a day before to set up our gear. On the day of the wedding, it was cold, windy, and raining, as predicted. There were less than 30 people with twice as many chairs and food set up. The ceremony went off without a hitch, other than the arbor and decorations being blown over. It felt very much like an episode of Bob's Burgers. The plan was for the guests and wedding party, minus the bride and groom, to set up tables for the reception. This would have worked if the backyard hadn't been on a slope and a majority of the guests weren't children. While things were getting set up, I learned from the maid of honor that the bride picked out her dress months ago with 0 family there. This was very odd because my husband's family is close, and it took weeks to get the dress altered. I also learned that things had been planned since she got engaged. She had gotten another sibling's spouse to make her cake and cheesecake. The groom is allergic to eggs, so that one was kind of hard for the in-law, but they managed it. They were paid. We were literally a last-minute thought that she either didn't care about or believed we would do without question. As most of the tables were nearly set up, not that they all needed to be in the first place, the groom came over and asked us to put on music since it was too quiet. I told him the bride, his wife, said she didn't want any, but okay. Music went on. The bride looked upset. I didn't care. The event ended uneventfully. As we were leaving, that's when I found out she wasn't going to be paying us, and I realized she never once said thank you. Not to her brother, not to me. In fact, she hardly spoke to us the entire time. She said nothing to either of us in the following weeks. Now, years later, she's divorced, and we don't speak. I really hope that wedding was worth it. This wedding sounds more like a chaotic circus than an actual wedding. I don't know why some people's manners completely go out the door just because it's their special day. The world doesn't revolve around you just because you're getting married. Next story. That was some amazing Godiva chocolate. Back in college, I was in a friend group with 2 girls, Sally and Greta. Sally and I were kind of on the polar ends of our friend circle, so we only really hung out in a larger group. But Greta was close with us both. After graduation, Greta moved to New York, and Sally and I both ended up in Boston. Being in the same city, we hung out a few times one-on-one, but our friendship never really grew closer. No biggie. We both had our own lives. A year later, I got an amazing opportunity for a job in London. I was shortlisted for an in-person interview at their New York office. I called up Greta, asking if I could crash with her for a night. It would give me a bit of breathing room not to fly in and out in one day. Plus, it would be really fun to catch up. The plan was that I'd drive down Friday morning, go to my interview Friday afternoon, have dinner with Greta, spend the night, and drive back to Boston Saturday morning. Greta was all for it. But we got to talking and thought it would be really fun to make it a longer weekend visit and invite Sally. So the new plan was that Sally and I would drive down on Thursday, have dinner with Greta, entertain ourselves Friday while Greta went to work. I'd pop off to my interview, and we'd meet back up with Greta for dinner. Then we would spend all of Saturday together and drive back on Sunday. Cool. Everyone was on board. Sally insisted on driving because she didn't think she'd be comfortable in my car. No biggie. I took an extra day off work, contributed some money for gas, and we were off. We had a great time Thursday evening. Greta's place was in Brooklyn, but her office was in Manhattan, only a few blocks from where I'd be having my interview. So Friday morning, I packed a change of clothes and my presentation materials, and we took the train to Greta's job with her. I left my stuff there, and Sally and I went to do some touristy things. Afterward, we came back to Greta's office so I could change and fix my makeup. The plan was for Sally to come with me to my interview and hang out somewhere nearby. Afterward, we would reconnect with Greta and get dinner. But apparently, while I was changing in the bathroom, Sally went and got herself a Godiva chocolate. When I came out and said we needed to go, she snapped at me. She said she just paid a lot for this chocolate and that she was going to enjoy it in the air conditioning. It was a sweltering New York City summer, and that not everything was about me. I was floored. No, not everything was about me. We had a whole girls' weekend that wasn't about me. But this next couple of hours, this interview, was absolutely about me. It was the whole reason we were in New York in the first place. Now, I always suspected Sally had a complicated relationship with food. Sally was a major control freak and a downright bully when it came to planning meals. But I never spent enough time with her to really push back. I typically just let her have her way. But I couldn't miss a job interview over a chocolate. I didn't say all this to Sally. I just told her I could go on my own while she hung out at Greta's office, and I would be back to meet them both after. And that's what I did. When I came back, both Sally and Greta were absolutely upset with me for abandoning Sally, a grown woman, for 2 hours, at an architectural landmark, so there was plenty for Sally to do. Dinner that night was stiff. On Saturday, they continued to freeze me out like a couple of high school mean girls. In the mid-afternoon, I made some excuse and told them I would take the train back. Sally and Greta were upset about that too. Apparently, Sally magnanimously drove me to New York, but when I got done with my stuff, I selfishly left her to drive back alone. I got the job in London and never saw Sally again. I still connect occasionally with Greta, but only through mutual friends. Next story. Entitled Mall Walker gets caught trying to sneak into the mall before opening. Now, before I get into this, I want to give some context. I'm a 31-year-old guy working full-time at my local mall. Usually, I just stick around the food court cleaning tables and the like. But I also do other tasks, such as cleaning the lids of the mall trash cans and cleaning the vendor areas. One thing we have here at the mall is people who walk around the mall to get some cardio in, or, as we call them, mall walkers. Now, they do usually buy some things or get some lunch in the food court, but other than that, they're harmless, just minding their own business and going about their day. Well, a couple of weeks ago on Saturday, which is our busiest day of the week, I was cleaning the carpets when I saw some mall walkers waiting at one of the entrances next to a clothing department store that I will leave nameless, as it will give away where I work. And I tried telling them that they'd have to wait for security, but one of them pleaded with me to call security and let them in. We usually open the doors at 9 a.m., even though the mall opens at 10 a.m. So me being the people pleaser I am, which I am slowly but surely working on, I gave in and called security. My boss, while he wasn't raging about it, still wasn't pleased and told me I couldn't do that anymore, especially on Saturdays, as we'd only have one security guard on call. He said that the only thing I could do was ignore them, but if I wanted to tell them that they'd have to wait for security, then I shouldn't call them if they begged me to. So, a couple of days ago, I was doing my rounds and saw those mall walkers waiting outside the entrance to the food court this time. I told them when the mall opens and that they'd have to wait. Some of them asked me to call security, but I told them I couldn't do that anymore. Some were annoyed, but they accepted it. Except for one lady. She practically banged on the door and demanded I call security and let them in at that very instant. One of the mall walkers told her to stop, but she was having none of it. I remember her saying, word for word, "I didn't come all this way to the mall just to get turned away. I don't care what time you open. I want in, and I want in now." Again, I told her she had to wait until 10 a.m., and she started going off on me, telling me that I was a terrible employee. I will admit, I rolled my eyes and just walked away. This made her furious, and she actually started punching the door and screaming at me to come back, which... Nope. I did contact security to warn them about her, and they said they'd keep an eye out. Well, not even 5 minutes later, I heard a commotion in the vendor area for the food court, which was between a sushi bar and a bakery. I contacted security again to tell them about it, and they said they were already en route. It turns out, Karen McMallwalker had snuck into the vendor area leading to both the food court and a jewelry kiosk, and one of the mall employees told her she couldn't be in there. This again made Karen furious, and she, from what the security guard told me, got in the employee's face, and it got physical. One thing to note is that Karen is a white woman who had to have been in her 40s and was throwing down with a mixed-race woman who had to be in her late 20s to early 30s, specifying races for contextual reasons. Karen was told she could either leave the mall and take a permanent ban, or she'd be arrested for breaking and entering and assault. I should note I was a witness to this conversation between Karen and the guard. Karen told this guard, again, word for word, or, as a third option, "You can go away and let me walk the mall, you ugly," insert racial slur here. This made the guard just up and call 911, and they came once the doors had opened. Karen was taken to jail for breaking and entering, assault, and resisting arrest. Seriously, what is with these Karens and resisting arrest? A mysterious mystery that probably won't be solved. This may seem fake to some of you, and trust me, I wish it was. However, with how crazy this world is right now, who knows anymore, right? Next story. Extended family doesn't understand boundaries. A few Thanksgivings ago, my uncle, my mother's brother-in-law, ruined the celebration in a big way. We had extended family over, and a few of the adults were playing card games. My mother was winning, and my drunk, possibly high uncle decided she was cheating somehow. He accused her. She laughed it off. He literally flipped the table they were playing on. It broke a bunch of glasses, and my mom was shoved into the corner with the table on top of her. My uncle, by the way, is around 6'4" and probably 230 pounds. My older brother, who is 5'3" and maybe 140 pounds, charged my uncle as soon as he understood what happened. More relatives jumped in, but my uncle was the biggest by far. He was very much punching down at everyone trying to stop him. I, for my part, started gathering all my younger siblings, cousins, and nieces, from toddlers to mid-teens, and barricaded myself into a room with them. The kids were screaming and crying, but I just had them huddled together to try and comfort each other. I hushed them a bit and listened at the door for anything. The next part I didn't see with my own eyes. But apparently, my brother was beaten down by my uncle. My cousins and father tried to chase my uncle out of the house. They tussled down the hallway and eventually crashed into the door I had barricaded myself and the kids behind, but didn't break it down. Once they got my uncle outside, they locked the screen door to keep him out, maybe trying to talk him down. The screen door we have is a metal mesh with metal framing for support. My uncle, however, was not going to let that stop him. He slammed on the door until the screen broke off the metal bars in one corner. This is supposedly when my dad brought out his machete and chased him off the property. I don't know why my dad had a machete. It was literally still in the packaging before he brought it out for this event. My mom's sister went out to drive around and find her husband, leaving 3 of her children stranded at our house. And of course, the party was obviously over. When the dust settled, my mother had some minor scrapes and aches from being pushed over. Our door was broken. My brother's eye was swollen shut, and my father was furious. This leads into another sequence of events a few weeks later. The oldest daughter of the offending uncle was having her first child and had planned a baby shower at her parents' home. All of my cousins have a really close bond with my mom, as she's always opened our home to them whenever they've needed a place to stay or a place to vent. So, my cousin really wanted my mom to be at her baby shower. The only problem was, my uncle had never apologized. My mom's sister had even told my mom that no apology was necessary, that she just needed to get over it. My mom's sister also mysteriously had some bruising on her face when she came to talk it over with my mom. She even implied that her husband's reaction was justified, and maybe my mom shouldn't have cheated. Which, to be clear, my mom did not cheat. She just doesn't drink or use any substances, so it's easy for her to beat a few drunks at blackjack. Anyways, my mom refused to go. My cousin pleaded with her and was looking for any kind of compromise. My mom gave her 3 options. The uncle is not present at the shower, the uncle apologizes, or she will not be showing up. This very much upset my cousin, to the point she began talking negatively to the rest of the family. My younger siblings, who mostly hadn't been informed of the extent of the drama, I'd managed to shield them enough from the actual event, were excited to go to the baby shower. After talking it over with my mom, she decided that I should just go and take my younger siblings with us. My older brother quite obviously didn't want to be involved. My mother thought the drama would cease if she let us show our faces there, and that hopefully things would be smoothed over. In a way, she was right. The baby shower was largely uneventful. My uncle basically stayed in his room the entire night. We didn't greet him when he made a brief appearance, and then we left. That side of the family wasn't invited to any of the family gatherings we hosted for the next couple of months. Well, besides some of my cousins. But then, eventually, my mom's sister came around again, and then my uncle came around again. They never apologized. They just showed up less and never stayed at a party for a long time. My family literally forgives anything. Oh, and our screen is still broken. It's pretty crazy how one person can cause a situation to escalate so much. It sucks that OP's mom had to handle the situation the way she did, but she did it with grace.